Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. My name is Whitney Richardson, and I'm the Global Events Manager at the New York Times. The New York Times is dedicated to seeking truth and helping people understand the world, a mission that is highly relevant for our climate change journalism. To that end, today is the first session of Netting Zero, a virtual event series on climate change. Our goal is to bring action-oriented ideas together and to subject them to faith challenges, to create the conditions for a more informed conversation around climate action. The series will continue as we approach COP26 in November 2021 and the New York Times' Climate Hub, an open multi-use space that we will host in Glasgow. It will be a destination for innovators, students, community members, business leaders, policymakers, and others to discuss and debate scalable solutions around climate change. Today's conversation between our dynamic list of speakers will be moderated by our very own Hannah Fairfield, climate editor at the New York Times, who manages our dedicated team of climate journalists. Before we begin, just a few logistical notes. If you'd like to ask a question, you can submit it in the chat function below. And you can also follow along in our conversation using the hashtag #NettingZero on social. With that, I will hand over to Hannah Fairfield to begin today's conversation. Hannah.
Thank you, Whitney. And thank you all for joining us here. I'm Hannah Fairfield, the editor of the Climate Desk at the New York Times. And our mission is to help readers understand their world and how climate change touches all parts of it. Like the science of coronavirus, the science of climate change is very clear. The world is warming dangerously, humans are the cause of it, and a failure to act today will deeply affect the future of the Earth. The devastation of COVID-19 has forced change for all of us. Much of it has been swift and startling. To combat coronavirus, governments poured money into rescue. Companies adapted their goals and production. Central banks permitted exceptional stimulus packages, and societies mobilized to shield the most vulnerable. Have these dramatic actions given us a blueprint for mobilizing action against climate change? Is this an opportunity for a new path forward that puts accelerating climate change solutions squarely in the middle? We know that climate change is a problem that requires exponential solutions, and that's what we'll focus on today. The global response to coronavirus could be the beginning of the economic, technological, and society transition that will allow us to dramatically reduce carbon emissions in the next 30 years, helping us to avoid the worst effects of climate change and limiting the global temperature rise in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. This conversation today is about the lessons that we and decision makers everywhere can draw on to ensure a better future grounded in bold climate action. It's the first in the Netting Zero virtual series, which brings together people who are leading on climate solutions. Today's session is the first step on the road to Glasgow, where the next major international climate negotiations will happen at COP26. We're joined today by Nigel Topping, who, as the UK's high-level champion for climate action, has had a significant role working with governments and parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Nigel, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Can you set the scene with a challenge for today's participants?
Right. Well, thank you, Hannah. I mean, as you say, we're facing disruptive change in all sectors of the economy to bring about the necessary and I think increasingly we see inevitable transition to the zero carbon future. But the question is, how fast are we going to do it, and what form is it going to take? And I would like to thank you and the New York Times for the this is complex. It's uncertain and it's important. So we need good journalism to help guide us. So thank you for the work that you're putting into this. I think, as you say, we're seeing from the response globally to the coronavirus epidemic that when we decide to politically, we can turn on a dime and invest trillions of dollars. So I look at this a little bit through the lens of what JFK pulled off with the moonshot in the 60s. When he said in 61 that the US was going to land on the moon, most people thought it wasn't possible. USA didn't have a rocket that could put someone into orbit. No one knew what the surface of the moon was like. Some people thought that the astronauts would drown in 60 foot of moon dust. The best mathematicians in MIT said we don't even know how to calculate the orbital trajectory to land there. And if JFK had been put off by those sort of councils of doom, he'd have said, oh, well, maybe we'll try and do it in 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. But he didn't. He just said, no, we're going to do it by the end of the decade. And I think that's really what we're seeing right now we're in a battle between those who say, this is why it's too difficult to do and you must go slower, and those who say, no, we are going to do it, between the kind of negative risk-obsessed mantra of the incumbency and a positive opportunity view of leaders who choose to step forward. So we're in a crucial time now. I think we're in the early stages of radical systems change across every sector of the economy: energy, transport, food, industry, buildings. Gonzalo Munoz, my fellow high-level champion from Chile, and I recently launched a race to zero, and we're seeing thousands of businesses, investors, cities now committing to build that zero carbon economy as soon as possible. And the real challenge that I'm really looking forward to hearing from our amazing speakers coming, seems to me the real challenge is, how do we build the momentum so that as more and more of us realize that the change is possible, and the more and more of us commit to it, it becomes more and more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that exponential change you talk about. And it seems to me that the real barriers are, before the technology, they're barriers of imagination and courage. So the challenge I'm really keen to learn more from our speakers is, how do you unlock imagination and courage in more and more leaders so that we come together to bring about the transformation needed at the pace and scale that is requisite to tackle the challenge ahead of us. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Imagination and courage. I love it. I want to introduce our first panel of speakers now, and I'm going to start with Christiana Figueres, the co-founder of Global Optimism. Christiana, can you tell our audience today why this is important to you and how you see your part in the challenge that Nigel has just framed?
Thank you, Hannah, but I have never been asked, why is it important to me? It's sort of a strange question, frankly, because isn't this the most important thing that every single human being should be focused on, is the future of the human race? I mean, you know, we're not talking about little cars, we're not talking about toys here. We're talking about human survival. So that is no exaggeration, and that's why it's important to me and to you and to everyone on this panel, and should be to everyone living right now. But to pick up from where Nigel left us, could I just reiterate that I completely agree with Nigel that this is totally the opportunity. The fact is that governments, because of COVID and because of having to recover and get the wheels of the economy, the global economy, spinning again, governments are actually allotting anywhere between $12 and $20 trillion to fresh and of capital into the economy. Fresh capital, never been done before, never been done before. And frankly, very difficult to see how it would ever be done again in the next at least 10 years. So that injection of capital, in the short term, it has to get the wheels of the economy going. It has to recreate jobs and create many new jobs that are sustainable in the long term. That is the short-term purpose of that money. The long-term purpose is that that fresh capital is actually going to determine the carbon intensity of the global economy for at least this decade, if not several more. And it is precisely this decade during which we have to be able to cut our emissions to 1/2, reaching half of the global current emissions by 2030, so that we can get actually to net zero by 2050. Now, what we should remember about that money that is going in is, first, the scale and the speed of it is completely unprecedented, but also, and therefore very determinant of the economy that we will see over the next 10 years. But also, let me not speak only to your head, but also to your heart, because that is not our money. We are borrowing that money. Every single government is going into debt for that money, which actually means we're borrowing that money from the pockets of our children. That's where that money is coming from, because they're the ones who are going to have to pay for it. So if we're borrowing without even asking them, if we're borrowing money from our children, we better make sure that that money is invested in their interest and not against their interest. We cannot steal their future from them. We have to be able to construct a solid future for them, one that is a future of resilience. And to the specific question of what are the very concrete opportunities that we can look at, it seems to me, and how to ignite people's imagination, and I love the way that, that Nigel put that, how to ignite. It seems to me that we could start with solutions that are multidimensional, shovel-ready jobs that bring down the cost of living or the cost of heating and cooling your house, that improve human health, that improve urban conditions, that strengthen the economy, that improve energy independence if you're looking at it as a nation. Those are all multidimensional solutions. And we're so used to thinking one dimension, right? Or two, or three maximum. But actually, all the climate change solutions are multidimensional. And that's what makes them exciting, because they actually touch on so many different factors at the same time. Furthermore, most of them are existing technologies. Yes, we have a very good report from the IEA that says, you know, that these are some of the technologies and we still have to create some others. True, but we have many technologies at hand already. So for Nigel's race to zero, one very concrete thing that is already happening is the countdown, which is going to be launched at 10/10/2020, October 10th, 2020, which will bring together many, many businesses, social enterprises, citizens. It's going to be campaign to support Nigel in his race to zero. Because what we have to remember is that the role of business is no longer about shareholder primacy. Thank you, Milton Friedman. You've done your job. It is now time to move forward. Most businesses that understand that their business continuity is actually dependent on the health of society, those businesses understand that what they have to focus on now is shareholder primacy. And that if though they do not contribute directly to social and environmental solutions, that business is actually already in a sunset phase. So just for survival, the role of business has dramatically changed, and for the better.
Thank you, Christiana. I'd like everyone to meet our second of our first panel, who is Bertrand Piccard, who is the initiator and chairman of the Solar Impulse Foundation. Welcome, Bertrand.
Thank you, Anna, and hello to everyone. When I initiated the Solar Impulse project to fly around the world in an airplane that was using no fuel, that was in 2002, I wanted to demonstrate that clean technologies and renewable energies can achieve the impossible. Now that we have done it, I have learned something else. These technologies have become profitable. And this word of profitability is really what I would like to emphasize during this COVID-19 crisis, because there are a lot of people who are suffering. They are losing their job. They have no money. You have a lot of corporations who are ready to get bankrupt, and small companies already bankrupt. So if you tell them that we are going to use money for the environment, instead of giving them a job, it will not work. People will not understand why we take care of the future instead of taking care of the present. This is why I think it's very, very important to understand that the world we had before the crisis was a world that was unstable, fragile, polluting, and mainly inefficient. And when you are inefficient, you are not very profitable. You are just at the limit of the recession all the time. Today, if we speak of a recovery, it must be a recovery in efficiency, because we lose half of the energy we produce, half of the food we produce, half of the water we produce, half of the natural resources we extract. This is why the economy is not going very well, even before the crisis. So a clean recovery, a green recovery, is mainly an efficient recovery. We need to implement the solutions, the technologies, the energy sources, the products, the systems, the infrastructures, the materials that are financially profitable to protect the environment and to create jobs. So we don't need to choose between reducing growth, like some of the Greens are asking, which leads to a social chaos, or having, at the contrary, a quantitative growth where we always produce more and more, which leads to an environmental chaos. We can go now for qualitative growth, where we make money and create jobs by replacing what is polluting by what is protecting the environment. And at this moment, we can tell to the people, we take care of your jobs, we take care of your company, we take care of your economical presence, because the solutions that are going to be implemented are going to be cleaner, more efficient. And by the way, they also protect the environment. But I believe this is a wonderful way to make an alliance with the industry, an alliance with the political world, because these people have the power. They are the people who decide. And when you have a company who has 50,000 salaries to pay at the end of the month, you need to give them something. So if you tell them, we're going to help you to be more profitable and more efficient, I believe we will win on every direction, on absolutely every sector. And then we will really have a chance to raise a wonderful enthusiasm, not just wishful thinking, but something very, very practical and very concrete.
Thank you, Bertrand. And now I'd like to introduce our third panelist. This is Alexandra Palt, who's the Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer at L'Oreal. Welcome, Alexandra.
Good evening to everybody. Thank you. So I'll build up on what is said by just saying from where I speak. Of course, L'Oreal is a company. We have succeeded to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% since 2005, scope 1 and 2, and we will be neutral on scope 1 and 2 in 2025. And we have science-based targets aligned with the knowledge of science in order to limit our contribution to global warming at a 1.5 degree level. So I say that because I would also like to add that while we reduced our carbon emissions by 80%, L'Oreal has never been more successful. At the same time, we raised by 37% our production, which means that we succeeded to decouple the growth from our carbon emissions, and the share price has gone up. This was an extremely successful decade for us. But now, of course, I'm aware that we are not a very polluting industry, that might be easier for us than for others, and we are very modest and humble on this because most of our emissions are in scope 3, what is called, the scope 3, meaning when our consumers use hot water to rinse off a shampoo. That is where most of our emissions are, and we haven't tackled that yet, and this is still ahead of us. But we think that what we try to share with our competitors, with our suppliers, with all our ecosystem, is that this is possible, and this is the only way forward, as Christina and Bertrand said very clearly. So that led us to even intensify our commitments with the coronavirus crisis, and not to cut down or to say it is coming in a second step, because this is nowadays the risk, of course, with companies, corporations, with a lot of countries also, that the social crisis that is ahead of us and that is going to be very difficult, that people will look into short-term solutions, into wrong short-term solutions. So the challenge is that some companies and some successful companies try to share that it is possible to change. What I would like to say is that, of course, Bertrand is also right, because when we look at the 80% reduction of our carbon emissions, more than 1/3 was just energy efficiency. It was about not losing energy. 1/3 is then, of course, renewable energy and some really innovations within our value chain. But I think what is the most important thing that I would like to say about corporations, and this is where I'm perhaps a little bit worried, is that it's not one or two action. It's not one big thing. It's not, well, we will do that, or we will put this money on the table. Actually, if you want to transform your company, if you want to live within the limits of the planet, you have to change everything, the way we have done everything. And this is really a huge amount of work and a huge amount of leadership and political will within a company. And so it's very, it's a little bit scary when people think that the solution is one or two good ideas. That's not about it. The system as we have created it is a system that is based on a false assumption of infinite resources and infinite waste. So we have to rethink everything. And that is a huge challenge for companies, not just related to carbon emissions, also to water use, to biodiversity, to resource utilization. And so this complete transformation and transition, that needs to be based on science and confidence in science. And I think this is the biggest challenge for cooperation, because this is much huger, more complete, more transformative. And the only question is, how fast are we going? Are we going fast enough? And so I think there is still some awareness raising necessary around that.
I think that's an excellent point. And actually that's where I would like to start our conversation, is that acceleration, that speed that it will really take to meet truly ambitious climate targets. I wonder, Bertrand, if you would like to start by addressing that. You know, how can leaders and actors make sure that the acceleration that is necessary actually happens?
I believe the big mistake that we are doing now is that we try to identify the problems, and once we see what are the problems, we look for solutions. We should do exactly the other way around. We have to take all the solutions that exist to be more efficient and implement them everywhere. This is what I call the theory of the piranha. You know, the piranha, these little fishes, when one fish is attacking you, it doesn't hurt you. But if they want to kill you, they come 1,000 of the time. And then they eat you in a few seconds. This is exactly what we can do with climate change, with environmental problems. It's like Alexandra was saying, it's not just one or two solutions. And this is why at the Solar Impulse Foundation, we are now selecting and labeling technological solutions that are profitable to protect the environment, and we make it public because it's a non-for-profit. Today, we have already 567 of these technologies that are profitable to protect the environment in the field of water, of energy, construction, mobility, agriculture, industry. And this should just be implemented everywhere as a way to be more efficient in the industry, to be more efficient in the economy, to show to the investors where to invest in order to have a better return on investment. And then the governments can support this by putting the regulations that are adapted to the modern situation. Because today, we have to be honest, it is still fully legal to pollute. If it was illegal to pollute, all these technologies would be pulled to the market. And this is where all these companies and startups would develop, would bloom. You'll have a lot of licorns coming, a lot of jobs created. And I think this is the way to go.
Christiana, what kind of lessons should we and our leaders draw from the response to the coronavirus crisis that relates to the acceleration? Decisions happened very quickly in the last couple of months. Do you think that there were lessons that we can take from that as we move forward?
I know. I just have someone making wonderful noise above me. So why don't you go to someone else and I will send a message up there. Come back to me.
All right, I will do that.
Can you hear the noise?
I cannot.
Oh, okay, fine. If you cannot hear the noise, then that's fine. And it's just me. Okay, wonderful. So how to accelerate? How to accelerate
and lessons that we perhaps will be able to take on that acceleration from the coronavirus crisis.
Well, as Bertrand has already noted, and Nigel as well, it really only takes a decision, right? And then we can certainly accelerate finance. So, the first acceleration that we have to get to is here in our minds, to remove this mental barrier that we have against solving this problem. thinking that this is an unsolvable, unsurmountable, so complex, such a wicked problem that we can't do it. So the first barrier to be lifted is right here. And you know, if we had that attitude of impossible for other things, we just would never be able to do it. And you know, Bertrand has proven this over and over again, and Alexandra has been proving it at L'Oreal for quite a while. It's about changing our attitude and our mindset first, and deciding, A, this is necessary, and we all know why. B, it is entirely possible. And 3, it is an advantage for us. It is entirely within our, for our benefit to do this. And so if we change that mindset and we look at this very much as an opportunity to cut down on waste, to cut down on inefficiencies, to cut down on irresponsibility, then we're actually standing in front of a universe of countless solutions that we can deploy. But it's very much about changing our mindset from the barriers and the responsibility and, you know, the complexity to the opportunities that we have. And honestly, I think if we look at our own personal lives, we know the power of changing our mindset from something that we think is impossible in our personal lives. And once we decide, actually, I'm going to make that happen, then we do make it happen. And it's the same thing at the global level and at every level in between. It's very much about changing our attitude toward this. And many companies have. Many companies have. It's just that it hasn't been mainstreamed yet. We haven't normalized the go-get-it attitude that Bertrand was talking about at the very beginning.
Alexandra, to go off of Christiana's point, how have you seen that change in leadership on the company level, on the industry level? It certainly has happened in some places, but we're really talking about, you know, big transformational change.
Yes, so I think it needs different elements to come to this change. But before I go into details, just telling people who are sending in messages that I would love to respond as soon as Hannah allows me to respond on the issue, on some of the issues you're bringing up in the questions. I would be very happy to answer. But just on the change part. So I think, you know, when you look on big change, how big change happens, there are multi-factors. Of course, how is coming awareness and mindset shift? You have big catastrophes that bring awareness. And I hope that COVID on the biodiversity issue is such a momentum that will bring awareness. You have legal constraints. I think this is also something that makes people move. Political will. Today, I see, unfortunately, more political will within companies than very often on national governments. So, but we need everybody. I think, and this is very important, and we need every source that can lead to change. And every opportunity has to be used. And I think what I can see and what I hope, but I'm optimistic because I think we need, who wants to be, it's the only reasonable solution to be optimistic. So I think what we are seeing is that society is coming to a tipping point. We see that awareness that, you know, 10 years ago, we talked to everybody and we said the future of our children and so, and well, now people understand it's not just the future of their children, it's their own future they are looking at. And I think they feel the consequences. So I think we are coming to a tipping point. And then once you are at the tipping point, the solutions are coming much faster and things move much faster. And that's what I have seen also at L'Oreal and with our competitors and in the industry is now the question is not anymore, should we go or not? Now the question is how fast everybody goes. And I think that is good news because I hope that consumers, civil society will push, that governments will push, that everybody is going to be aware that we have to accelerate. Just to respond to one of the questions I saw, for example, the part on plastic. Yes, plastic is a very huge issue. That's the reason why we committed in 2030, 100% of our plastic will be recycled plastic or biosourced. We are already in 2020 at around 15 to 20%. In 2025, we'll be at 50%. Of course, this kind of change doesn't happen overnight, but we are engaged in this transformation. We are not perfect. we are going in the right direction. And but we commit to these transformations, which is of course bring plastic out, but also to respond through innovation. For example, solid shampoos, refill, recharge, all the solutions. And there, that is also the question, how do we bring the consumers in to change consumption behavior and to allow us to go faster in this direction?
I would really like to get to a couple of the reader questions. We're getting some excellent ones. And I'd like to read one that was submitted by Dayna. And this question is, what is the difference between the challenges and opportunities faced by the Global South versus the Global North in the intersection between COVID and climate change? I'm going to open it to the panel. Let's go.
Well, I may be the only Global South citizen, so on the panel at least. So let me take that one and then invite my friends to contribute as well. It is definitely two different realities. There is no doubt about that. And COVID has been extremely helpful in pointing out that lesson among many other lessons that we are learning. And the reason is quite clear. From the COVID perspective, people who live in the Global South do not have the capacity to isolate themselves in homes that give them spaciousness. They're in the South, you easily have 14, 15, 16 people living in one room. And so when the government says, you know, social isolation, everybody looks at each other and goes, well, how? Plus, the percentage of people in the informal sector that completely depend on their daily income to feed their children is much higher in the South than in the North. And therefore, that is the population that is most hit, because most of those jobs have actually completely disappeared. From a climate perspective, is exactly the same thing. From a climate perspective, there are also fewer resources and much weaker institutional capacity in the South to deal with climate, to be able to undertake mitigation, adaptation, in addition to the fact that there is incontrovertible proof that it was the industrialized countries that actually originally caused climate change. And it is the Global South countries that are bearing the disproportionate brunt of that. So what to do? What to do is actually to put before developing countries the possibility of looking at this, not, as I said before, not as a huge burden, and certainly not as their responsibility. It is not their responsibility, but it is a huge opportunity. And so much like in the Global South, we have been able to leapfrog over telephony lines, if anybody remembers what a telephony line is. And most of the Global South is actually now connected, those who do have a phone, because it's not everyone, through cellular phones, because we never had the money to extend those lines. And we now know that we didn't have to. So with equal, leapfrogging technology attitude, we have to bring all of the new technologies, the renewable energy and land restoration technologies, all of that to the South, because it is a huge opportunity. The South is not as vested. They don't have as much infrastructure. They have to build much more new infrastructure than in the North. And all of that infrastructure should be low carbon and high resilient. But it has to be put forward as an opportunity and as accessible from both a technological and a financial point of view.
I think that's great. And it actually segs to another reader question that I think is really, really important. This is from Helen. Can local governments lead this change, or does it depend on corporate evolution first?
Well, I think that you have a lot of pioneering corporations, lot of industries who are ready to do the job, and some have started already, like L'Oreal, and Alexandra explained it very well. But now you have companies who resist, and they want to continue business as usual, although it is bad for them, bad for the customers, bad for the economy, and bad for the environment. So what we need is to set the standards according to the corporations who are doing the best, in order to decrease the risk of distortion of competitivity. We have to put the legal framework in accordance to match what the pioneering corporations are doing, in order to oblige the corporations who resist to go faster. And this is a thing that is really important also for your previous question, Anna, about inequalities. Inequalities, it's not only morally unacceptable, it's also very dangerous. It makes social unrest, it makes civil wars, it makes migration and things like that. And we have to show to the developing world where is all the advantage for the local economy to develop renewable energy infrastructure, to be more efficient, to implement all the latest products that can create jobs and make them richer. And this is a way to stimulate the people to say, wow, if you protect the environment, you support the economy, you get richer, you have more development, you have more economical growth. And this is also a misunderstanding that we have to destroy immediately. We have no opposition between economic growth and protection of the environment.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now is introduce our next panel. And so this is going to be our panel 2, and I'm going to bring panel 1 back at the end. But right now I'm going to introduce you to 3 new speakers. For our new speakers, what I'd like you to do now is to please tell the audience what you've heard from our panel 1 speakers and how you see these challenges through the lens of your organization, and give us one main reaction on how to best advance the climate solutions that we have just heard about from these speakers. I would like to start by introducing Dayna Cunningham, who is the Executive Director at the CoLab at M.I.T. Welcome, Dayna.
Thank you. It's great to be here. So at CoLab, we work with communities. We're a development and planning lab, and we work with communities that are marginalized to advance creative solutions to climate and other kinds of urban challenges. And so that's why this panel is really important to me, just to say. And I want to start, though, by noticing both the tremendous amount of agreement around the need for equitable solutions and not a lot of clarity about what that means. So for example, the premise was the COVID response and this global mobilization of societal resources, including protecting the most vulnerable. Not so much in the US, I would say. In fact, we highlighted essential workers, lifted up their roles, but actually didn't provide enough personal protective equipment or sick leave or health insurance. And so, or even income or food for those who lost jobs. So there was a sense of heightened social responsibility and empathy in the urging of the public to wear masks and to social distance. And that's a good start. And maybe that's the beginning of creating the public will and the political will for more inclusion. And maybe even that was part of the evolution that led to the reconsideration and the reckoning that's happening right now with Black Lives Matter. But there is a need for imagination and courage, to use Nigel's term, to really consider what does equity mean, equity and inclusion. And so I actually think that there's a bit of a deficit framework that creeps in when we talk about equity and inclusion. And it is framed in terms of us, whoever us is, protecting the most vulnerable. And I want to kind of shift that discourse and talk a little bit about innovation from the margins. So not just taking care of people, but actually understanding that people living at the cutting edges of environmental and social crises have deep insights into the systems that have failed them, and they have desires for the innovations they want to see. So working in that context means actually a dramatic reframing of who has knowledge and what knowledge matters. Coming from the perspective of a global technology institute like MIT, we understand that technical expertise is still really, really important for innovation from the margins, but that technical expertise has to be framed within an equity perspective. So for us, a reinvigorated sustainability approach in the wake of a COVID-informed response puts robust citizenship, participation, and ownership from the margins at the center. It understands that equity means both fairness and ownership. This also happens to be a claim of the Black Lives Matter movement right now. Black Lives Matter tells us that racism blocks impulses towards equity. It's not just immoral, it's actually inefficient. And it is, I think it was Christina who talked about this infinite resources dilemma. There aren't infinite resources, and there are polarizing choices to be made. So the question of self-governance is really critical. So I just want to give some examples. New York City, Clean Air Act, a lawsuit requiring that the city bag 500 million residents' garbage daily. Can't burn it anymore, you've got to bag it. And in order to do that with no additional resources, the housing authority had to cut social programs. So the Public Housing Association comes back and asks the environmentalists who originally mobilized around the Clean Air Act lawsuit, could you please support us in our demand for more funding for children's programs and other kinds of social programs? The environmentalists said, no, that's not our issue. We're working on clean air. So sustainability is a wide open territory now, and there's a lot of room in this moment when we really need all hands on deck in order to reach zero carbon. So there's room for new, what I call gain sharing approaches, business models and participatory approaches that spread the ownership both of risks and rewards. So here are some quick examples. Don't just push to shut down coal. Follow the example of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, which has a Just Transitions platform. And the Just Transitions platform asks for improving the lives and livelihoods of coal miners and mining communities, not just eradicating coal. So what does that mean? Job creation for energy efficiency, through energy efficiency, land, water, and forest restoration, much needed in the degraded hills and hollers of Kentucky. Democratizing the Depression-era community-owned co-ops that are now dominated by big coal, even though they're community-owned. And as a result of that domination, they are pushing over-reliance on the world's dirtiest fuel. Expanding healthcare infrastructure, and all of these different quality of life moves that could incentivize broad ownership of environmental claims. Don't just push for efficiency and renewals. Follow the example of the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative that's organizing mothers to improve interior air quality and reduce childhood asthma, but could also demand jobs for the retrofits required for interior air improvement and a share of the insurance savings from reduced hospitalization due to reduced asthma. Consider self-organized co-ops that own microgrids and band together to regulate their own peak usage so they can reap the savings to fund their own social programs. Many other examples. Post-COVID, public housing residents need green space, they need fresh air. Why not build affordable housing in the future with balconies to catch the breeze so you don't have to rely always on air conditioning and raise carbon? Lots more. But here's the bottom line. We are in a hurry, but we can't afford not to build in capacity for shared governance and shared ownership of sustainability challenges. Sustainability is complex, it is ever evolving, it is multi-generational, it's a forever challenge, and there won't ever be a last problem. So our goal has to be to build widespread capacity to solve the next problem.
Thank you, Dayna. Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Johan Rockström, who is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Welcome, Johan.
Thanks, Hannah. Hello, everyone. I want to start by following on a statement by Christiana Figueres on something I know she agrees on, but I think it's important to remind us that we were borrowing from future generations well before the 11 trillion were put to recover after COVID-19. And that's why I'm here fundamentally. I'm a scientist and I'm deeply worried. We have unequivocal evidence that we are at risk of destabilizing the whole planet. We're coming dangerously close to tipping points that would self-reinforce warming, meaning that we would lose control. But I'm also here because I love the moonshot. I really do, Nigel. And, you know, John F. Kennedy, when he announced this, he had 10 years. And science is also very clear here. We have 10 years. We're entering the decisive decade when we need to cut the global emissions by half to have a 66%, a 2 chance in 3 of keeping global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and aiming for 1.5 degrees Celsius, a point we haven't been to for the past 3 million years. Now, the third reason I'm here is that I want us to understand that COVID-19 is not a black swan. It was well predicted, and it's a triple crisis. It's a crisis of global warming, interacting with ecological change, interacting with a hyper-connected, unsustainable world. We know today that this is a spillover of virus from wild animals, via domestic animals, over to humans. We know that there is no health for people on an unhealthy planet, and that's scientifically backed. Now, what can we do about this? What are the solutions forward? Well, I think that Nigel and this whole dialogue here is right on target here. We have 10 years to unleash a revolution. This is about exponential transformations. Can we do it? Well, there is scientific evidence that things can change abruptly, even when minorities get large enough to tip over the majorities, a kind of a David knocks Goliath type logic. Everett Rogers published already in 1962 the fundamental book, the legacy on how to diffuse innovations, showing that when novelty penetrates up to 20% of markets, it can tip over the logic, just like when the iPhone took over the world and knocked over companies like Nokia. The Apollo program, Nigel, employed, sure, a lot of people, 400,000, but JF Kennedy was a minority. He was a keystone actor. 400,000 was certainly not the majority of players in the world, but it tipped over the logic in the whole world. That's the magic. Can we, under 10 years, get a large enough minorities to show, just like Alexandra, just like Bertrand so eloquently shared with us, which I would argue has so much evidence today, that sustainability has changed face. It's no longer the story about protecting nature from the bad humans. It's the story of success. It's the story of equity. It's the story of justice. It's the story of a future, of a better life, a healthier life, a more prosperous future. Now, that's the narrative. And if that narrative can come on the ground, and if we can put conditionalities on the 11 trillion and not allow $1 of those to go to more carbon polluting, planet undermining business, then I think we have a chance. And finally, a very concrete measure. The US is very critical to the WHO, wants to have an even stronger global governance of health. Well, I agree with him. Science would agree with him. Why not give the World Meteorological Organization a similar power to be the global watchdog on every country's ability to truly follow science? Because that's where we've ended up to. We need science-based targets for human development on a stable and resilient planet. So we have some tools in the toolbox. Let's unleash them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. And the last member of our panel I would like to introduce is Luisa Neubauer. She's a climate activist and one of the co-organizers of Friday for Future. Welcome, Luisa.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm a climate activist from Germany. I co-founded the Fridays for Future movement here in this country after I witnessed what was going on at the UN climate conference in Poland, sponsored by coal and gas companies, where I was really shocked to see where we are in the race towards keeping emissions low. And it was there that I was suddenly feeling that this was going all wrong, and it obviously needed a stronger voice from the streets, from youth, to actually get into this and push for change. And I'm really inspired, and I'm really moved to hear all these inspiring people or you sharing your thoughts. And I'm also really moved by the optimism on this panel, which I think is rare nowadays. It is one thing that I really want to point out, first of all, is where we are at. And we have, we've spoken a lot about opportunities and a lot about solutions, but effectively where we are at right now is nowhere near the plans that we need to keep emissions low, nowhere near where we need to be in order to limit global warming. Effectively, more and more governments worldwide are signing contracts with companies, signing contracts with each other to implement fossil fuel infrastructure that will effectively, eventually, be the driver to keep emissions up, to basically get us way beyond 2 degrees. That is what's happening right now, and we see that those governments aren't just governments like the US, like Brazil, who certainly aren't the ones we would expect to act first, but those governments who are signing contracts right now that manifest emissions which are way too high, that are governments like Sweden and Germany too, governments which are considered progressive, governments which we are looking at to lead the way out of the climate crisis. So the status quo is concerning, it's deeply concerning. And right now we are way beyond a target, a pathway towards this low emission world. But as we're looking here at solutions in particular, especially coming from this COVID pandemic, we are seeing now, which Nigel has pointed out so well, that there is a crisis solving mode that we can take up. We have, as societies, as governments, the ability to actively say yes to a challenge, to actively consider a crisis at our own crisis and consider us the ones who have to solve it. That is what Corona taught us, that there is such mode. And there is that mode that allows us to spend all the money that is needed and to take up, all the inconvenience that come along with that. People stopped shopping, companies were shut down, industries were shut down, the digging stopped. There was a mode where people acted, in an emergency. And I think that is really the question right now. Will we be able to demand that mode? Will we be able to actually, ask this to be the mode in which we solve the climate crisis effectively? And that is only possible once we change the story we're telling. Yes, we've accepted the climate crisis as a tragedy of the commons, but it is only a tragedy up to that point that we, the commons, retell the story and understand that we, actively need to change something, need to change the way we approach this. And I feel like coming, from a climate crisis perspective, coming from the generation that is now, being part of those who are giving the money to governments, I see that the global arena where we should be solving the climate crisis has turned into a party of excuses. We are making excuses everywhere, especially governments, but then, closely at pretty much everyone else. If it isn't one country finger pointing to another, it is one company finger pointing to another. Yet those excuses, they can be ruled out. Governments used to say, well, you can't really do the climate crisis protection thing because people won't want this. And we have changed this. We, the climate activists, brought those people on the street and said, look, these are the people and they want you to act. Then government said, well, we can't really do something because, we need to win elections. We changed this. The European elections last year were won by those who had plans for the climate crisis. You could suddenly win elections in democracy with plans for the climate. And right now, in the midst of the Corona crisis, we are at a point where governments keep retelling the story of a climate action that is not affordable and that can't be done for the sake of the economies that need to be protected. And that is a really interesting point where, considering what Alexandra has pointed out, where we need to retell the story and where we need to look at companies in particular to understand themselves not only as, that one player that halves a mission, but as a political voice. We need to understand each player, the companies, the people, the governments, of course, but also other institutions everywhere, as political voices to push for that and to rule out those excuses that are being made and that no longer, that are no longer valid. And that is, I think, really where we are. Alexandra has said that, the climate crisis won't be solved by one or two actions. That is totally true. And I would add to that, it won't be solved by one or two companies changing the way they behave. It is really about everyone starting to change the way they act. And, either they're ideally they're willing to do that, or we change the rules so they have to. Where I really look at everyone, and where we as a climate activists look at everyone, in particular companies and governments, to change the rules.
The changing of legacy systems is really something that I've heard all of you speak to, whether or not you've used that phrase, and it seems like it is one of the major obstacles here. I'm curious, Dayna, if you see legacy systems as something that can really undergo dramatic change right now. How do you view that?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that came through in the chat was about changing cost-benefit analysis. And I actually think that's a critical piece, that, as long as we have sort of a standard, we look in a very standard way at cost and benefit and don't consider all of the externalities that are implicated in climate solutions and all of the benefits that could be accrued, I think we won't get to legacy systems. So I think it's making visible a much broader range of externalities and a much broader range of benefits that might be possible if climate change, if sustainability measures were put in place.
And political will is something that I've heard a lot of you speaking about as well, that political will is something we saw changing. Do you agree with that?
I think political will changes slowly, and I think it changes in waves. One step forward, two steps back. I think we are in a moment right now where there's a lot of openness for widespread systems change. And, I think this, going back to this question of whose voices count in political conversations is critically important. So how do people at the margins who are suffering from the sharpest impacts develop their own capacity first to understand the impact and to address it on their own terms, and then to join the conversation rather than the typical question, how do we let them in as part of the conversation, I think is really, really important. How can a place like MIT invest in the capacity through research with communities that are facing the contradictions? How do we invest in the capacity to participate meaningfully and fully?
And also, maybe another piece of that is how do we identify the effectiveness? Johan, I wonder if you wanted to sort of speak to the science of that.
I'd like to speak first on the science on legacy and Luisa's point about how we get everyone on board, because I think it's important for us to recognize that, if it had been 30 years ago, I think we could spend essentially all our time, as we did at that time, on awareness creation and kind of broader legacies and values and kind of trying to get everyone on board, both in the political system and businesses and communities. But now we're running out of time, quite frankly. I mean, Luisa is right that we're moving along the wrong trajectories and we only have a decade. I mean, just think of the car industry, for example, that needs to now set end dates on the combustion engine. And that end date has to be roughly 20 to 30 years away. And we know there's a 10-year cycle in every kind of model platform for that technology. So the decisions are today to be able to have a chance of that transition, to have any chance of stabilizing the climate. So we're talking about global urgency. And I think therefore, of course, within the realms of democracy and of course, within the realms of the political realities we're in, We have to combine legacy, values, and cultures and awareness with top-down strong leadership. And that's why we need take some tough decisions. We need the kind of moonshot type decisions to unleash the exponential technologies that Bertrand was talking about. I think that combination is absolutely necessary.
I have a question from a viewer, from Kristen, and we've touched on some of this, but I expect there's more we want to push on. How can we incorporate climate justice and equity into the green recovery that is necessary? Luisa, I'd like to hear what you have to say on that too.
Sure. If I maybe just, very quickly follow up on what Johan pointed out, because I think that's a very new aspect to that panel. We've talked a lot about innovation, but we haven't talked about, basically the partner of innovation, which is ex-innovation. So the opposite of that, ending practices that have, run out of time, whose time has come. And that is really interesting when we, want to make space for innovations, in particular, talking of renewables, we need to make that space by ending, technologies, phasing out technologies who we basically can't afford anymore. And that is basically, where there needs to be governments who actively say goodbye to coal or, to the combustion engine, which is it's a very uncomfortable discourse, a very uncomfortable discussion. But I think we are seeing worldwide how energy transitions are failing when power structures tied into monopolies in around coal and gas and oil aren't broken apart, but kept to an extent that the good green innovations have basically no space to actually, thrive. When it comes to climate justice, and I think Dayna has pointed out a very important aspect here. Yes, we should not just shut down coal. We should justly shut down coal. Looking at that aspect. So when we talk about climate justice, coming from a justice aspect, we talk about power effectively. That is what about who is asked, who is heard, and who are we doing this for? We are not solving the climate crisis for the sake of the climate. We're effectively doing this for humanity, and there we take everyone equally. It is about the people of today as well as the people of tomorrow, the people of the global south as well as the people of the global north. And when we take that as the foundation of how we're acting and why we're acting and where we're going, we come to a point that we drastically need to disperse power, connect the dots between social movements, social inequalities, environmental inequalities, and come together, which effectively is what we're doing when we go together on the streets as a social movement that is fighting for social equality through environmental justice.
If I could just add, what if we reframe the whole question of carbon as the global north as carbon debtors? We owe a carbon debt to the world. We are and that makes the global south kind of holders of that debt and in need of repayment. Flipping the conversation around who has assets and who does not. In this moment, that's one way to rethink how we approach these solutions.
I think that's really, really interesting. And another question I had for you, Dayna, in your wonderful specific examples in your introduction, I was really struck by the power of them. And I wanted to ask you, and I think our readers are interested in scaling. How do we scale some of these in ways that can just, go big?
So there's two ways. One is, you have to include within legislation provisions for democratizing process. So you have to have put the duty on polluters to engage, to consult, to co-create with communities. I just want to say that government is always a really important scaling mechanism. We do a lot of work with labor unions, and we work with unions of low-wage workers who collectively have actually tons of money. So one union alone, the Service Employees International Union, has $1 trillion in assets under management. Most of that $1 trillion is not considered as a development asset or as a resource for green solutions. But why couldn't it be? Because SEIU members who are healthcare workers and service workers are at the cutting edges of a lot of the social and environmental crises that we are talking about. So what if you redefined stewardship, financial stewardship, and could think about their ability to invest tons of capital in the interests of their own members, but towards environmental solutions that could scale?
Great.
I can just add very briefly that I think as a complement to what Dayna says, if you then add to that a price on carbon, and most science shows that a price on carbon that exceeds $50 per ton of carbon dioxide, but a paper came out yesterday showing that the price, if you take social cost of carbon and justice into consideration, should be roughly $100 per ton of carbon dioxide. Your President Obama had a price of 40 during his administration. Now, if that was put in place, plus a science-based target of 0 emissions in 2050, that would give a very strong incentive package to unleash and scale innovations.
Let's bring our first set of panelists back. They've been listening raptly. Let's bring them back and see what kind of responses that they've got to some of your challenges. So we've got Bertrand and Alexandra. I'm sorry that Christiana had to drop off. Bertrand, would you like to kind of jump into some of these, these good pushes?
Yes, with pleasure. You did a great job, Anna, in bringing Luisa on board to have a representative of youth, because usually it's only political economists, scientists who are talking together. And the youth today is doing a great job. They are pushing the politicians to act because they are electors. They are electing the politicians. And for the politicians, it starts to be like a panicking wind to observe that a lot of the population is going to vote against them. So Luisa, you've done a great thing. Now there is another thing I would like to say. In all the speeches that have come in the last hour, we have the word climate change that comes a lot. And climate change now is like a dogma. It's a political dogma. You have the one who believe in it, and you have the people who don't believe in it, which means that it is not something that is inclusive. It is separating people. It's making debate. It's making a lot of aggressivity. I would like to reframe the same debate as what we are having now without the word climate change. Imagine that climate change would not exist. Everything we said now in the last hour would make sense nevertheless. And this is maybe another type of wording we have to address. We have to speak more about pollution than climate change, because the ice melting on the South Pole, there are not a lot of people who see it. But pollution, air pollution that kills 7 million people per year, people see it, feel it, and it can be a child or a parent who is suffering or dying. The profitability of the new technologies, it is opening new markets. And why that? Because CO2 is not only a factor of climate change. CO2 is a factor of inefficiency. If you produce more CO2, it means you are wasting energy. It means you are wasting natural resources. So it allows to have a completely new wording. And when we are speaking about a very important topic that has been raised by Johan, it's the conditionalities. We didn't speak enough of that. When we bring trillions of dollars on the market, and we are asking the economy to recover, there should be conditionalities. It should be prohibited to use this money to make again polluting cars, to make again houses that are not insulated, to have industrial processes that are completely inefficient. I give you just an example to finish. There is one American solution that we have labeled at the Solar Impulse Foundation. It allows to produce cement for concrete with 70% less, 70% less CO2 emissions. Can you imagine how much more profitable it is to do something like that? This is the type of things that has to be pushed on the market by the governments in order to create the jobs of today, not only the jobs of tomorrow, but the jobs of today.
Thank you, Bertrand. And Alexandra?
Yeah, well, but I do not agree with Bertrand, the reframing of the discussion, I have to admit, because I think that when science is as clear as it is, we have to continue our discussion about climate change, and we have to name things with a scientific reality, because otherwise we are not tackling the problem, but kind of trying to work around it. And I think this is I'm a little bit afraid that this wouldn't lead to success. So I'm much more comfortable with a carbon price, with a high carbon price that is reflecting a scientific reality. Where I completely agree is, of course, the mobilization of the younger generation, because I think if indeed long-term thinking is something that is not particularly part of political decision-making. But as the youth is particularly interested in climate change, and they are going to be voters for quite a long time, I think that this generation is definitely going to change the political debate. And so I think this is really good news, because what I see when I also look at the companies that are most committed to fighting climate change or work on environmental issues, these are companies that have a long history and have more long-term culture because of their shareholder constitution and things like that. So I'm really in introducing the notion of long-term, and the younger generation is helping us on that, because they are here and they are going to stay a while as voters. So I can just agree with what Luisa said, and I think that's unfortunate in our debates because we all agree. So how do we bring on board the people who do not agree, and how do we bring them into the discussion and make them change behaviors? Because it has to be more beneficiary for them to change behaviors than to not change. And we are not there yet. And this is our next challenge, I think.
Excuse me, Anna, can I just answer to Alexandra? The way to bring in the dialogue and in the action the people who are fighting against us is precisely, I believe, to change the wording. To tell them that
is not, but I do not believe in changing realities. I do believe in changing mindsets with a scientific reality. And so I understand what is your plan, but I'm from my point of view, I'm afraid that this is not, that this might introduce other traps, but this is a discussion that I would love to have with you afterwards.
And this is exactly why we're here, to debate the how do we get there? What do we do? And that's a really interesting point of debate. I do actually, before we go back to Nigel, I really would like to give an opportunity to our panel 2 speakers just to come back and if you want to do just kind of a quick wrap, I would really like to give the opportunity to do that, since we allowed panel 1 to do that. Dayna, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think we are in agreement on the need for innovation, the need for participation, the need for equity, and the question, of course, is how. The devil is in the details. And my request would just be that we keep democracy and ownership, broad opportunities for ownership across the board on the table.
Great. Johan?
Yeah, so to start with, I tend to agree with Alexandra as well, but let me just say therefore why Bertrand fundamentally is right, which really concerns me, because You're absolutely right, Bertrand. We don't need to use the climate science to argue for a zero carbon, healthy, more attractive future. That is why there's reason for double frustration. Because not only is the science showing that we are at risk of unleashing catastrophic impacts, we also have solutions that are more attractive. So there's a double reason to act. And this is what really, really burns, so to say, and I think should make us all very active. Then let me just put forward finally something that may come across as a bit provocative, but I think, Alexandra, that we've spent too much time trying to convince people who are not willing to join the momentum. I think we have to rather do just like Nigel suggested. It's a moonshot. Let's get those who are truly convinced, the Orials of the world, to join forces and really show that this is the journey of success. This is the journey, this is the winning team. And you join the winning team or you lose. And that is a much more constructive focus. Scientists have spent so much time in trying to battle the skeptics, trying to get awareness creation, trying to, reach out. And I think it's been, quite frankly, the wrong strategy. I think now is the time for the moonshot.
Luisa?
I think I'm sorry, just to add on that, because it's a debate. Why do we have to choose? I think we can continue to convince, and we can do the moonshot, and we can restructure the debate. I think just that all these things have to go together, and we need, of course, constraints and legal. I do not think that we have to choose between one and another, because I think that science has done quite a good job, especially you, in convincing people and, developing things that allow us to understand, the safe operating space and things like that. So I think you haven't reached the goal, but I think you guys have done a great job.
Convinced.
Luisa.
Yes, so I'm a huge fan of this Club of the Willing, and then making that not only visible but also powerful in a way that those who are willing to change the game, develop such political power, because that's what we need to pressure governments into carbon taxes who are then implemented in a just way, etc. I just wanted to point out what was mentioned about youth being part of this, and I'm really glad and I'm really humbled to be excited. I just want to, point out one, I think it is a bit of a misunderstanding, which I come across all of the time when people say, oh, it's wonderful, young people want to change the world. Yes, we do, but we don't have time to grow up to do that and be once the politicians or be once the company leaders or be once those scientists to bring out the solution. Yes, everything we want to do, we could do without the climate crisis here, but there is a climate crisis, and that is a time frame we have, and that is so incredibly small. The carbon budget it's tiny, and what we as youth who are, whose future is being stolen, who is watching right now how people are tearing apart their future, our futures, what we are saying over and over again, and what is being overheard over and over again, is that there is no time for us to solve the issues. It's up to those who are in power right now to do it now, to change the way they act now, or to step away and let others do that. But there is no time for us to be those. What we can do, what our job is effectively, is to push for change, to push for voters, to change public opinion, to level the playing field for everyone else then to grow up to, and to do everything they can, even more than that, everything they have to do in order to contribute to this, to a just transition, to actual climate protection, to the protection of my and our futures.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Nigel back because he started with this challenge talking about this crucial time, which is exactly what Luisa was just talking about. Nigel, tell us what you heard.
Well, first of all, what a wonderful conversation, and really, I think testament to the power of multiple perspectives. Like, it makes it a much more interesting conversation when we have diversity of perspectives. Although there's a lot of agreement, there's some nice healthy tension as well. So thank you for that. It seems to me that well, we can all agree that we should be worried. We've heard the worried scientists and the worried youth activists, right? Because the facts are worrying, but that we also need to generate excitement, because it's excitement and opportunity that generates action and incentive. So we need that kind of moonshot. We need to remind ourselves that there's a reason to be worried, but then turn that into the moonshot. And I feel like there's almost, I remember when I was a young engineer being taught the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. You know, efficiency is about doing things with very low waste. So we need efficiency, but effectiveness is about doing the right things. And we know that sometimes we do the wrong things very efficiently. So this is why we have the problem with GDP as a measure of happiness, or a measure of well-being. It measures the wrong things. It measures bad things. This is the same as good things. So if we just focus on efficiently delivering the wrong things, we end up with bad outcomes. And we, like inequality, right? We can have average efficiency and we can have horrific inequality. So it does seem to me that there's a place for efficiency. We need the rational science-based targets. We need to accelerate full deployment of those best known solutions that Bertrand's talked about. We need to not say, shall we go, but how fast, as Alexandra says, and because we need to change everything. But then that's not enough, because there's this much more political, holistic domain that everyone's also been talking about of qualitative growth, Bertrand called it, or multi-dimensional solutions that Christiana talked about, solutions that therefore appeal to people on multiple, don't just appeal to profit, but appeal to profit and health and climate and jobs, so are more likely to garner the political momentum that is needed. Because as I'm listening to Luisa talking about youth, I think we also got to remember that it's not all young people. You know, a lot of young people live very wasteful lifestyles, just like their parents' generation do. So we need young activists to change their own generation, as well as put pressure on their parents' generation. Nobody's got a kind of a fast grip on virtue here. We all have to change. And I think it's this kind of innovation from the margins that Dayna talks about that is going to be the key to turning from the idea that the tragedy of commons is an inevitability to building the capacity. I love the way that, Dayna, you talked about inclusive governance to give us the capacity to solve not just today's problems, but to keep generating the capacity to solve the problems that will keep turning up in the future. So I'm struck with this idea of exponential change. You know, as Johan and others know, I'm obsessed with the early end of the combustion engine. Germany reached 8.4% EV market share in June, almost trebled a year ago. And if you add hybrids, 17%. It's more than 1 in 6 cars. Nobody in Germany is going to be buying a combustion engine within 10 years, in my opinion. We need that same kind of exponential change, and we're seeing it in the social movement. We've got 7.5 billion people on the planet. We need 7.5 billion climate champions. Maybe if we can get to 20% of them by Glasgow, 1.5 billion people committed to act, we'll be able to demonstrate that all of the excuses that Luisa talked about can be challenged, and that there's enough momentum from all parts of society, global north, global south, young, old, front lines, research facilities, boardrooms and investors, that we can deliver the clean, resilient recovery much faster than anybody imagined was possible even a few years ago, because we can and because we have to. And we'll only do it by doing it together. So I'm left really encouraged, and thank you for the conversation. I'm really looking forward, Hannah, to the next sectoral netting zero events as we go through the rest of the year and next year, to the big countdown event that Christiana talked about in October. We'll also be looking with partners to run a series of race to zero dialogues in November, at the time that the COP would have been. So let's all roll up our sleeves and figure out what we can do individually to recruit more people and to accelerate our own action, and then we'll get there together. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll do it with imagination and with courage. Yes. Thank you all, to all the panelists, for just taking the time to work with this exchange of ideas. I learned a lot and was really inspired. And I thank you, absolutely. And I'm gonna turn it over to Whitney to talk about what we're gonna do next. This is just the beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hannah, for your skill for moderation, and Nigel for your summary. And thank you to all the speakers and to audience members for your participation and your questions for today's dialogue. We look forward to welcoming each and every one of you to our next digital event series in Netting Zero. This one will be focused on scalable solutions for cities, and that will be on September 22nd. And you can find more information and register for that event and other events in this series by going to nytclimatehub.com. On that website, we'll also have a recording of today's session. Many of you in the Q&A section have asked on that, so you can find that again on nytclimatehub.com. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This has been great. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.